Chairman Van Bramer, distinguished members of City Council, I've had the privilege of meeting some of you before. I'm James Claffey Jr., President of Local One of the International Alliance's Theatrical Stage Employees. I am here today to provide testimony on behalf of the coalition of IATSE unions, collectively representing over 15,000 members, of which 500 theatrical workers representing more than a dozen crafts at the Metropolitan Opera House. There can be no productions of grand opera at the Metropolitan Opera House with all these union professionals in their crafts. However, the Met Opera, under the leadership of General Manager Peter Gelb, is now subjecting our members to a union-busting scheme. For this reason, the Metropolitan Opera Coalition is asking the New York City Council to refrain from providing funding to the Met Opera in the city budget. You all likely know that Local One's membership, at least our stage crew of more than 350 stage and shop workers at the Met Opera, have been locked out for more than 14 weeks by the Met's management. While Local One is the only union that's been locked out so far, as a practical matter, our situation creates a de facto lockout for other workers represented by the IATSE due to the interconnectivity of our work. In addition, most of the other unions representing workers at the Met are working under expired contracts or have been asked to reopen collective bargaining agreements early for the purpose of providing massive concessions to the opera company. The purported rationale for the concessions, an overwhelming amount of which are work rules, is premised on the impact of the COVID-19 on the Met Opera. In reality, the Met's demands utilize the pandemic as leverage to obtain non-COVID-19 related concessions. Examples of such concessions include a 30% reduction in pay that extends for years with no relation to the end of the pandemic, and work rule changes that imperil health, safety, and quality of life for our members who are typically required to work 75 hours a week with around-the-clock schedules and weekend work. When looking at management's demand for concessions, it is clear that there is no nexus. There's no.
Feel free to continue, Jim.
My thanks, Mr. Chairman. It is clear there is no nexus with COVID-19, and the global pandemic is a mere pretext to bust the unions and gut the contracts fairly negotiated over many decades. We recognize that Met's finances are impacted by the pandemic. Our members are also greatly impacted. Workers have lost employer health care contributions and struggled through the unemployment process. It is for this reason that our union and many other unions whose members work at the Met are prepared to consider concessions while the Opera House is shuttered. To this point, we have seen examples where other institutions have worked closely with their unions to craft mutually agreed upon collective bargaining agreements that recognize the harm the pandemic is inflicting on our institution. As you can see in our submitted testimony, which is lengthy beyond the 2 minutes I've been afforded. So if you take a look, Mr. Gelb and management are not demanding massive union concessions to account for the impact of COVID-19, but rather as compensation for their historical pattern of poor financial decisions. It is important to emphasize Mr. Gelb is systematically engaged in financially risky, flawed, and failed management, which he then seeks to paper over with demands that the Met Opera workforce should shoulder the cost of his blunders. The Met claims a need to reduce costs and yet spends huge sums of money on management and on scrapping and replacing productions, commissioning too many new productions that cost millions with no realistic expectation, even a break-even financial return. This was not the prior case, the case prior to Mr. Gelb's tenure. The consistency of Mr. Gelb's financial mismanagement has led to his increasing belief that the remedy to the opera company's problems is to bust the Met's unions. Instead of negotiating fairly, Mr. Gelb has chosen to lock out Local One and outsource up to a year of set and scenery work. 2 productions slated to be produced in Met's in-house shop have been subcontracted to Bay Productions in Cardiff, Wales, and another will be built in a non-union shop on the West Coast. While Mr. Gelb sincerely and publicly declares a need for sacrifice on all sides, he has chosen the path in which the quality of life of the workers is the sacrifice. The Met's demands would take away overtime rules, reduce sick day accrual, vacation pay, remove comp time, and reduce benefits. These take it or leave it demands impact the livelihood and safety of the workers. These items have been gained in mutual exchange over decades of bargaining. In effect, Mr. Gelb is demanding to return our agreement to 1999's terms. Therefore, the coalition of IA unions request that the New York City Council not provide funding to the Metropolitan Opera, including capital grants in the city budget, while it remains engaged in its agenda of union busting. We believe that the city withholds public funds from the Met. You'll be sending a clear message that policymakers expect nothing short of a good faith negotiation between the Met and its unions. And to be clear, a negotiation in which Peter Gelb presents all 9 pages of his proposals as a take it or leave it proposition does not constitute good faith bargaining and should not be rewarded with public dollars. I thank you for the opportunity to appear on behalf of the members of the Union Coalition, and I am certainly available to answer any questions should you choose to ask. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. And as you may have heard in my discussion with the unions representing all of our library workers earlier, and of course my own personal history being coming from a union family, it is absolutely unacceptable that the Met or any other organization would try and break unions and strip away hard-earned benefits that workers deserve. So you have our support and our solidarity, and happy to do anything in my role as the Cultural Affairs Chair to weigh in on behalf of the workers who are fighting this fight. So thank you, and we should definitely talk after the hearing and see in which ways we can help amplify the fight.
That'd be greatly appreciated, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.